It's cheaper to launch an EMP device from a balloon than it is to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile. And you're not going to detect this launch. That's why the balloon is a perfect sneak platform. Our mission here is just to wake people up. The potential for mayhem is too high. Technologies proliferate. All kinds of groups could do this. Small groups could have the means available to wipe out civilization. It is a threat that we're not prepared for. This is known by all our adversaries. They know this is our Achilles heel. If this is part of their approach and plan for taking out the United States, they don't want us to see that hand yet, but we got to get on top of it and do it now, because this could be any time. No water, no fuel, no communications, no bank account, no cell phone. It's all gone. Yeah, everybody needs to prepare. This is serious. What we're facing today, when the music stops and you sit down, you got what you got, so you better be ready.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Well, it's an honor today, guys, to have in the house a rocket scientist, Green Greggs. He's a YouTuber. He is Alabama State Director of the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security. These Homeland Security EMP guys always make me read the longest titles. He's an electrical engineer. He knows all about EMP. He knows all about stratospheric balloons. And that's why we have him here today. So how are you doing today, Greg? And maybe tell us a little bit about your background and what you specialized in throughout your career.
Hey, Nate, great to be on your channel. My background is in engineering. I have a long career as an engineer, and on the side, I've been extremely active as a space activist, and also started my own rocket company, my own rocket group, built hybrid rockets, launched from high altitude balloons. We went out to sea to launch these because it's a lot easier to launch a balloon from a ship, believe it or not. But that also poses part of the threat matrix we'll talk about here today. But electrical engineering has been my specialty for the last 20 years on things like the Space Launch System. I've worked International Space Station. I've designed pretty much the electrical and data architectural layout in nodes 2 and 3 of the International Space Station. So I've got a deep experience in aerospace, but I've also had a deep interest in space colonization. That's what drove me into that from the time I was a teenager. But I grew up on a farm, so I got the country background too, Nate. I'm a redneck rocket scientist. Got both in my and a worm farmer. I got all that in my repertoire here. But, I come to realize the risk that our society faces, and I could handle a lot of risk. When I started prepping, because of that, I could handle a lot of risk, but I couldn't handle the risk of loss of the power grid. That is so bad, so catastrophic. Most people don't realize how awful that's actually going to be. But this threat, it really drove me more and more into prepping. It drove me deeper into my homesteading activities. I mean, this is why I homestead. People have asked me many times, why would a rocket scientist become a worm farmer? It's, this is something that's going to carry you when there's no grid. I mean, when you can't go to the store and buy supplies for to produce your own food, you can't buy seeds, fertilizers, you can't buy plants, you're not buying any. I mean, it's like a game of musical chairs. When the music stops and you sit down, you got what you got, so you better be ready. So that's my background. I have covered a lot of stuff in my life. I've launched balloons from the ocean, and that's why the intersection of my experience in launching these high altitude balloons carrying decent heavy payloads, bigger than you need to do an EMP, by the way. And you can see that in my EMP Chinese military balloon threat video. I show actually how you could construct a simple nuclear system and put it on a balloon and evade detection and get it into the danger zone of taking out a whole lot of U.S. facilities. So that's it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, I really I think you got to get a t-shirt that says redneck rocket scientist. I think that would be pretty kick-ass. You're the living incarnation of Matt Damon on The Martian with the worm farms and the rocket scientist there you go. Perfect.
That's me as a 16-year-old right there.
Hey, that's a lever action too. That's a nice gun. So let's just lay this out in simple terms for people who aren't familiar with this area. What is a stratospheric balloon? How come most people just heard about them this year? And why are these a security concern?
Okay. Stratospheric balloon is a balloon that reaches up, the levels of and above, say, commercial aircraft. Typically, they go far above that. Typically, when I would fly a balloon, I would try to get 80,000 and above. I have flown to 115,000 and get 120,000. Some NASA likes to take payloads with these giant telescopes on them up to 130, 140,000 feet. It's capable. It's possible you can get 4 tons of payload to 130 to 140,000 feet with these balloons. Now, some of them may be as big as the Astrodome. You have 2 types of balloons typically that go to the real high. Well, there's 3 types that go to high altitude. There's these rubber balloons that go up and they burst. So they go up, and once they reach altitude, they expand to the point they burst, and you drop your payload. They're good for real short missions and a lot of fun stuff. The zero pressure balloon has open vent valves. So once it gets at the highest altitudes and the gas expands, you'll see a little bubble inflated at the top of that balloon and a lot of plastic trailing. When it gets to 100,000 feet, that balloon is expanded 100-fold because the atmospheric density is so much less. And if you were to overpressure that balloon with a thin material, it would bust. So you have an open vent channel at the bottom, or usually the fill tubes are also double function as vent tubes, and they will vent out so that the balloon won't break as it goes up in altitude. That's how that works. Now, the zero pressure balloon is thin, but the mission time is only a few days. Well, there's another balloon design that the Chinese have employed, and what you saw in this Chinese spy balloon is a super pressure balloon. A super pressure balloon is made out of a thicker material. It don't carry quite as much payload because the balloon has more weight. But the outer envelope is one thing, but they have an inner envelope, a different balloon on the inside of the Chinese balloon, and that is called a ballonnet. Well, they can pump air in between these 2 envelopes, and that air can serve as a ballast. They can dump that air, or they can put more air in, but it keeps the outer envelope at the same shape. Now, that particular balloon design was designed by the Air Institute, which is a sub of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and it was designed to be capable of carrying, I think it's 1.1 metric tons, over a metric ton of payload to 30 kilometers, which is like around 98,000 feet. So it's got far more capability in terms of lift and altitude than what we saw with the Chinese spy balloon that flew over. But the Chinese spy balloon flew at an altitude that was perfect for a lower speed flight for loitering, so they can do Reconnaissance and recover information from below.
So just to stop you there, what you're saying that the altitude determines the speed and the loitering capability?
Yes. You have different wind regions in the stratosphere. Where the commercial aircraft fly, you're accustomed to hearing about the jet stream. I hear you talk a lot about the jet stream, talking about the fires and other things going on. The jet stream that their commercial aviation moves in is pretty fast, as you well know. There's a region just above that, though, that the winds are much slower. And that's, you get 50,000, 60,000 feet. That's also the altitude, though, that fighter jets can get into. But if you go above that, and if you get to, say, 80,000 feet and above, the winds kick up again. And they get even faster than the jet stream. You can get up to 200 miles an hour at the higher altitudes. So if you want to loiter and take a good look-see, they'd set that balloon to be able to fly and to fly optimally at the region in the atmosphere where the wind speeds were the lowest. However, the design point is optimum for an EMP. When they designed it for 30 kilometers, that's like a bell going off in my head, because 30 kilometers is about the right altitude to give you a maximal EMP effect. When you have a nuclear device going off, it sets out a lot of gamma rays. It makes like a wave through the atmosphere of electrical energy. And you have three waveforms in an EMP, a nuclear EMP. E1 is the short wave, a waveform that will fry devices such maybe as your phone, possibly. But typically radios and stuff like that, definitely the bigger stuff. The E2 waveform is a pure electric lightning, basically. It's just like a big lightning pulse. The E3 waveform is picked up by long-range conductors such as power lines, rail lines, and pipelines. What's most of them on our grid is those large high-voltage transformers, the ones that are 200 to 400 tons, are as big as a house and very heavy. And we only have limited equipment for moving these things. You fry thousands of these. If the grid were working and things didn't go down, it would take you 10 years to replace them. Catastrophe if we lose all these. But these things are susceptible to get fried by this. So,
okay, so stratospheric balloons can be used for what purposes?
You can fly all kind of packages underneath these balloons. We fly telescopes on them. They can be used for spy purposes. They can be used to fly other military missions, such as to release drone swarms, to release. The Chinese did a test where they had 3 what looks like mini DF-17s hung underneath a zero pressure balloon. And those could be released maybe to attack ships at sea. So they can actually be used as weapons launch platforms. I have launched rockets from balloons. I think I've shown you a couple of the videos where I was doing some rocket launches from a balloon that my friend Bill Brown put on his amateur radio channel. So the balloon is a great platform for getting above most of the atmosphere. It's a great platform, and that makes it a great platform for an EMP launch. It's also at that altitude hard to hit them and do anything with them.
So that's something which interests me. So the balloons are very expensive to shoot down, and so they're up at such a high altitude. I think a lot of people think, you could just point a rifle at it and shoot out of the sky, right? But we're talking about distances that even a bullet can't travel. Even a missile in many cases can't travel. So how do you neutralize these balloons, and why is it so difficult to do so?
Perfect thing to bring up here is that take the AIM-9, for example. The AIM-9 has a stated range of 20 miles. That sounds great. Oh, yeah, we can take it down a balloon. Well, the problem with the AIM-9 is that it's a big, long missile with a little bitty motor in the back end, and that motor actually only burns from 5.4 to 6 seconds, depending on the variant of the AIM-9 missile, which means that it has a very short burn time, and the mass fraction of this as a rocket really stinks because it's got, you want almost all fuel mass to get a rocket to high altitude and very little payload structure mass. Well, this is heavy on the payload and structure and low on the fuel. So launching my airplane, flying horizontally, it can get a lot of range, but going straight up, it won't make 10,000 feet. That rocket will not reach 10,000 feet fired straight up. So if you're flying, it's 60, maybe if you could get an aircraft to 70,000 feet, you're not going to reach that balloon with an AIM-9 to save your life. It's not going to get there. A lot of people think, well, we can just take these out with lasers. A balloon ought to be easy to burn holes in. But, and we see all the stuff about lasers now we're putting on battleships. So these lasers are really good over a short range that exists within the direct immediate theater of the war. The problem with a laser beam is that beam spreads out as it goes through the atmosphere. And it's called beam spreading. By the time you get this thing, and especially if you're firing diagonally across the atmosphere, by the time you get that laser beam up to the balloon, it's not even going to make it warm. It's going to look like a signal. Too much beam spread. And that's also a counterpoint against your guys who think we're starting forest fires from satellites. I find that hilarious. That's not happening. That's another story. So,
yeah. So you're saying that the reason why we were able to shoot down this one from, I think it was like an F-22 or something that shot it down. So you can hit them using aircraft launched missiles, but you can't necessarily hit them from ground.
The thing with the balloons that were shot down was that the aircraft were flying at the same altitude. You might notice some of the pictures taken of the Chinese spy balloon, the aircraft was actually above it.
Okay.
So that made them targetable from an aircraft. When you are flying 80,000 feet and above, if I were going to send out one of these balloons to do an attack, I would launch it from 120,000 feet. From the aircraft with an AIM-9 missile is not going to hit a balloon at 100,000 feet above, probably not even at 80,000 feet. If you had a 20 millimeter cannon on it, the projectiles are going to reach maybe possibly up to 10,000 feet above, but probably not. definitely the AIM-9 is not going to go any higher than that. So, because it too is basically a projectile, because the mass fraction is too low, the motor burn time is too short. It's just not going to reach those kind of altitudes firing straight up. Yeah, it may have a long glide path through the air, but it's not going to reach altitudes like that. So the AIM-9 is also a heat seeker missile. So you got to have something on that package. If you had it in range, it's going to be kind of warm or kind of hot. Now with the spy balloons, they had a major communications package on board, a lot of metal truss structures, a metal box. So, it was sitting there in the sunlight. It had reasons to get heat. The way to get these, Nate, is to catch them on while they're being inflated. The way to get them is you got to have early detection. You want to get it before it gets out of range. This is going to be very vital to take these balloons down. So what you need is and we need to have some drone aircraft flying around out there in the Gulf of Mexico with the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean looking for these things. A couple of drones out there in each area, in each ocean with the side aperture radars, for example, would be a good start. It's cheaper to launch an EMP device from a balloon than it is to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile. And you're not going to detect this launch, coming over. So it's a good stealth way to attack us, just like a satellite would be a pretty good stealth way too, fractional orbital bombardment, like the North Korean satellite that flies over us a lot that doesn't communicate with us or do anything. So that's highly suspect. I could talk more about that in the future. But the situation is that just have to remember, this is a threat we don't expect. It is a threat that we're not prepared for. What I'm concerned about is that somebody would go offshore from the United States, 400 miles out. This is what I do. I go 400 miles, if I was going to do this, and I'm not going to do this, is why I'm spilling the beans on it. If I would go 400 miles offshore, because it's outside the ADIZ, the Aircraft Defense Identification Zone, and I would run with the wind, and I would release the balloon. Now, if you had a radar on shore strong enough to detect that balloon, and I understand they're really only good for maybe 250 miles, but if you could see that balloon just as soon as it pops over the horizon, due to the curvature of the Earth, flat earthers, us that operate in long distances with tactical stuff and radar know about this, that balloon's going to be at 80,000 feet. When you see it, if you could see it at that point in time, it's already over your reach. And by the time you get aircraft scrambled out there, it's too late. It's too late. That thing is too high, and it's probably drifting toward you if it's in the direction of the wind. Typically, a balloon is a sail. It goes with the wind. And whatever speed the wind is, I heard some people, 200-mile-an-hour wind will tear up. No, because it actually moves with the wind. It's part of it. So what you can do is you catch different winds. You can drop ballast to go up in altitude, or you can release a little gas to fall back down in altitude. You might find a wind that's favorable to your direction. But primarily, what I would do if I were on the side where the wind was blowing away from shore is I would just put a rocket on board and have, or some kind of drop vehicle that could glide a good distance. But I'd probably use a rocket assist, whatever I did. And then I could get the cross range I wanted. The Chinese spy balloon, for example, was set at 30 kilometers. That's 18.64 miles. The RF range, the range at which the radius for which the waveform could travel and fry things from 30 kilometers would be about 442 miles. So, or 737 kilometers for you guys in Canada.
Yeah, so what he's basically, what you're saying is that if you were to detonate an EMP on one of these balloons at 30-kilometer height, it would be a 440-mile radius or diameter?
Radius, the diameter would be twice that.
Right.
So we're talking 880-mile diameter for the balloon, Nate. So what that says, and here's the danger, you don't have to even get that balloon over the United States. You could detonate it outside of U.S. airspace and take out most of your coastal facilities from balloons. So if you had a couple of ships running the Gulf of Mexico, a couple of ships off the West Coast, a couple of ships off the East Coast, you could literally take out all our coastal cities, all the coastal ports, all the coastal military facilities, because from a military standpoint, the advantage of setting off an EMP, and there's a huge advantage from the altitude of a balloon, is your waveform is actually more concentrated on the ground. These higher waveforms are devastating because we just upped our hard inspect to 85 1,000 volts per meter, which still is insufficient for an EMP super weapon. I don't think we can really deal with that. Now, if you took that weapon and put it at 30 kilometers, the waveform right below it is going to be devastating. I don't know how anything is going to handle it. That's why the balloon is a perfect sneak platform, because it's cheaper than a rocket. It is hard to detect, hard to shoot down, and we're not prepared for it.
So what do you think the reason then for these Chinese balloons, what was the motivation behind that from your perspective? Obviously, you don't have all the answers, but what do you think the Chinese were trying to do in sending us, were they sending us a message? Was this a test? What do you think that was all about?
I think it was primarily a test to see how we would react, and I think our reaction was deplorable. We should have taken it down over Alaska. We should have taken it down over Montana. We should not have permitted it to travel over the entire U.S. airspace. The population is so sparse in these areas where it was at first, it would have been easy to have taken it down. We should have done it over Montana at least. But we've kind of signaled that we don't, but we'll sit around with our thumbs up our, whats and scratch our heads the whole time this thing is moving over, which was a bad signal to send the Chinese. That kind of tells them they can do whatever they want to. So they got part of what they wanted out of it in that regard. They also got to do a lot of data collection with that side aperture radar. We got satellites overhead, but they zoom over real fast. This thing was loitering. You could look sideways. You could see relief. You could pick up signals you can't get from a satellite, such as cell phone, from the balloon altitude. They possibly could even tell who the commanders in the units were, what their phone numbers were, maybe something about where they would go, maybe where they lived. I mean, all kind of detailed targeting information. If you got sleeper cells on the ground, they might want to know that. They might go to that commander's house at night before the attack occurred and just take them out. This is dangerous intel. And people just don't realize the level of danger of that kind of intel and what it can do for somebody that's planning an attack on us, especially if they potentially have sleeper cells on the ground here.
How many of these balloons do you think that the Chinese can put up in the air? You just talked about the possibility of them having the capability to put 1,000 of these up. We know there was some satellite imagery that came out a few months ago that showed that there's a base in Henan province, I believe, which these are launched from. The fact that they could release 100 of these, and even if only 10, hit their targets, that's...
Yeah, 10 would be bad news by itself. So, it was claimed by this guy, Juan Hongbin. He was a guy that delineated this and first broke it. He claims that the Chinese Communist Party has an entire balloon force, just like they have a branch of the military, which is a rocket force. And they've kept this secret and under wraps. They didn't want us to know it because this is their asymmetric warfare plan. And it would be perfect because we're totally unexpected and unprepared for this. So that Hainan facility is one facility. They can go anywhere out in the desert, anywhere where it's flat, and launch tons of these balloons. And that's kind of what I would expect with those super pressure balloons. So if you use a super pressure balloon, you won't want to stay up for a long time. So if you want to launch from China, that's the ideal balloon launch. Now, if they want to just pop up an EMP balloon, I would expect them to go about 400 miles offshore, like I mentioned earlier, 400, 500, 600 miles at most, and send up a bunch of these zero pressure balloons because they're cheaper and can carry more payload and reach higher altitudes. So there are ways to come up with systems to take these balloons down. And we just got to get a lot better at, one of the analogies you pointed out that I've liked and quoted from you and your channel is that shooting one of these balloons, you blow a hole and it's kind of like, as you said, opening the doors in a warehouse. So it's not just going to pop. If it was made of rubber, those rubber balloons I mentioned earlier, they would pop. A super pressure balloon, if it's overpressurized, might pop like the Chinese spy balloon did. But these zero pressure balloons are not going to pop. That's what I would use for this if I were launching from a ship. If I'm launching from China, I would use the super pressure planes.
So in a war of attrition, then these balloons would require, the only way we could shoot them down is we're using what, like $1 million missile to shoot down a $100,000 balloon, essentially?
That's about where we're at, which is ridiculous. That's why I said we need a Doolittle approach. to come up with a better means to be able to put more detectors, drones out there, and more things to take them down. Maybe the drone itself could go kamikaze and go into the balloon, but we need to take them down early, far out at sea, before they reach an altitude. So we've got to be able to be more proactive. But early detection is the absolute key. If you don't have early detection, you're in trouble. If you're waiting on shore-based radar to see the stuff come up and over, you ain't gonna do nothing. You're in trouble. You're just gonna lose everything.
So what about the reconnaissance capabilities of these? So many people will ask who are not familiar with this area, why wouldn't we just use satellites to get these high resolution images of the ground? Now I know they're loitering, so they can hover over a place for longer periods of time. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about the reconnaissance capability and surveillance capability of these loitering balloons and how they might be used in, say, a war in Taiwan?
So as a battlefield asset, the balloon is huge. Our battleships and battleship carrier groups, I mean, that's really the thing, our aircraft carriers and the carrier groups, they depend on two things to give them defense. One is they have various missiles and other things they can use to shoot down incoming projectiles. The Chinese just recently did a test using their hypersonic missiles. They didn't use the DF-21s and their so-called carrier killers in this test, which is interesting that they developed missiles they call carrier killers, but they relied on their hypersonic missiles instead. And they found with 3 salvos of missiles, they could, in their simulation, that they could exhaust all of the ammo that, all the missile systems we have to defend our ships. And they say and claim they can take out our entire fleet. But what our fleet relies on to mitigate that is we have published, and we think because our fleet is mobile and we're moving fast, by the time we launch these missiles, our ships will be out of the way and those missiles will just go in the drink. They won't be able to find the ship, and our carrier group will be safe. The problem is that the game changer is the balloon. The balloon loitering overhead is going to know exactly where you're at constantly. So if you're firing a Dongfeng missile from shore and you've got a balloon loitering over the area, it can send update data to that rocket or that missile to update it on where your position is. They may even have an onboard laser that they could fire down just to light it up, as a designator. So there's various things that balloon could do. Yeah, designation of target designation is huge, and we've used it a lot with our military systems. So you could do target designation, you could do detection and data updates, or just as we saw that zero pressure balloon that I covered in my video, you could actually carry strike vehicles on the balloon itself. And one other thing they might do, they might have an EMP balloon that would actually fry your communications there in the theater. If you're far enough out to sea that it wouldn't reach back to shore, they might just decide to set off an EMP and fry your stuff, and you'd be dead in the water. So they got various ways to deal with and use these balloons as battle balloons. Yeah, everybody needs to prepare. This is serious. What we're facing today is an outsized threat. It's all too easy to take down our grid with EMPs. It's just too easy to take it out in so many different ways. Dr. Peter Vincent Pry taught us that there would be a multi-pronged attack if they decide to do this. So they'll probably start with hacking. We believe that there are sleeper cells all over this country from more than one nation, maybe 3 nations, that might take out our grid. It might just go in and directly attack the substations like they did in San Jose at the Metcalf station there. So these things could happen. And then you add to that an EMP from a balloon, then maybe an EMP from possibly a satellite following that. I mean, they could just saturate EMP this country and you wouldn't know where it come from. And what a lot of people don't understand is the Russians and probably the Chinese are in the same boat, considering the EMP a form of electromagnetic warfare, electrical warfare, electronic warfare. The reason for that is that an EMP doesn't directly hurt anybody. You don't kick over dead and start doing the funky chicken because of an EMP. What happens is you die as a result of loss of infrastructure because you got no water, no fuel, no communications, no bank account, no cell phone. It's all gone. Electricity is the one critical keystone to all of our 14 critical infrastructure elements. Without electricity, you can't pump fuel. Without electricity, you don't pump water. You don't have sanitation. Just all these things that we rely on. Everything's electrical powered, and now we're trying to make things even more electrical powered. So we got a lot of issues with our grid, and this is known by all our adversaries. They know this is our Achilles heel. They know this is a way to put us out of business. So if you want to take an island, if you want to be the dominant power in the world, if you want to just get tired of the United States nipping at your heels, you can just shut us up.
How come Russia is not using this type of technology? Is it because they don't have it? Or why would they not be using, because it seems like the ideal situation to use a high altitude stratospheric reconnaissance or possibly even as a weapons platform. Why do you think the Russians aren't using it?
Well, for one, the balloon you talked to has corner reflectors on it, which makes it easy to pick up radar, which means it will pop up on the air defense systems of Ukraine and cause Ukraine to spend expensive missiles taking out cheap balloons. So it's a good way to deplete your adversary their air defense systems is to throw up chaff targets like little balloons. So they're already doing that. Russia has the technology. I think maybe the main reason they're not doing it, maybe most of the year, the predominant winds is blowing toward Russia, not over Ukraine. So in terms of reckoneering, in terms of spying, but also they probably have a lot of people in Ukraine, so they probably have assets on the ground for spying as it is. They may not need it, and maybe that's one of those things they're holding in reserve. I mean, why would they not use one for an EMP? Well, why didn't they take out the Ukrainian power grid already? They have not done that. They could have done it through several means. So they are being, as you pointed out, a little reluctant, or seem like they're holding back for various and sundry reasons. It's still to this point. What really spooked me when I was developing these rockets in the late 90s to launch some balloons, we started that program in 94, was that here we are working out of a garage with a handful of guys, and we're developing systems that used to take a superpower to accomplish missions that we were talking about doing. Mm-hmm. And suddenly here we were, just a bunch of guys working out of a garage on a part-time basis, reaching these kind of levels. I hit space with my first launch in 1997 from the coast of North Carolina. That's why I got this beautiful award here. But anyway, so Nate, the whole thing is that technology is proliferating. All kind of groups could do this. I mean, if I'd had a nuke, I could have done an EMP way back then, 25 years ago. I wouldn't have done it. I would have been the guy doing what I'm doing right now. Says, hey, you need to stop this. Here's what can happen. That's what I'm doing today. But what occurred to me then, Nate, was that with the proliferation of technology, we're going to reach the point one day where small groups could have the means available to wipe out civilization. Small groups, amateur groups.
And possibly even, it seems like it would be a good platform if somebody wanted to instigate a conflict between two superpowers because of the plausible deniability factor and not knowing where it originated from. It'd be a great way to be a catalyst to a major conflict if you wanted your adversaries to wipe each other out. Now,
that's the theme of a lot of James Bond movies. Some rich, mad scientist or businessman wants Russia and the United States to go to war, or Russia, in this case, maybe the United States and China. There are loose nukes, we believe, out there. It's reported that Russia had backpack nukes in the United States, and a bunch of them came up missing. We don't know what came up missing from the Soviet Union secure nuclear facilities after the wall fell down, because a lot of those had no security on them.
Well, I agree with you that it seems obvious to me that Russia is planning for a longer conflict with NATO, and that maybe their balloon technology that they've yet to fully deploy is going to be a part of that multi-pronged approach that they use when the time comes. All signs are indicating a major escalation in the conflict, whether Ukraine is successful or unsuccessful.
Yeah, that's the problem, is that we have people like Nikki Haley say if Russia wins, then that means nuclear war, then we have a lot of us who've thought that if Russia loses, that means the same thing from their side. It's kind of like we're danged if we do and we're danged if we don't. But here's why Russia may not be doing this. It would be playing their hand, showing their hand. If this is part of their approach and plan for taking out the United States, they don't want us to see that hand yet because we are not expecting it. We're not anticipating it. We've not geared up to be able to deal with it because some smart aleck like Greg Allison might figure it out and get out there and tell everybody, hey, y'all need to put these MQ-4s up in the air. You need to be looking you need to be looking at the Global Hawks and all these other aircraft for this kind of thing. You need to be looking for the signature of a ship traveling with the wind. Also, you got to remember, too, that both Russia, China, and Iran operate a lot out of Venezuela. And Iran's been selling some big missile systems to Venezuela. Now we got a Chinese so-called spy station going in to Cuba. What could they be launching from these areas? If you went offshore from Venezuela, you could actually launch missions toward the United States from ships like I did. So the potential for mayhem is too high. And if you want to surprise somebody, you're not going to show your cards now. China let us see a loitering spy balloon fly over, but they haven't let us see one fly over at the operational altitude for an EMP. So these are all things to keep in mind. This is what having the unique intersection of knowledge of balloon flights and EMPs and rocket launches I bring to the table. That's why I'm ringing this bell, is that I think this is a weak point for us.
As far as you know, Greg, does our government have any program like a balloon military program?
No.
Really?
We're totally unprepared for this. Now, having said that, we have some dirigibles we fly. We have aerostats we fly. We use balloons for recon. We do that in a battlefield as a recon, but we haven't developed any way to have countermeasures from these kind of balloons.
Yeah, it seems to me that when you take all these things into account, like our 10-to-1 disadvantage in tactical nuclear weapons, the hypersonic superiority of Russia and China, now they have the Sarmat, which is a longer range that can go around the other side of the world, the enhanced anti-ballistic missile technology that the Russians have. I mean, just a variety of these other systems, their EMP super weapons, now these stratospheric balloons. When you take all that, it makes us look quite vulnerable. And you have to ask yourself, sure, the US is a huge naval superpower, but, what are we really thinking in getting ourselves into this possible war with Russia? It seems as though they really don't believe that the Russians are going to go nuclear.
It seems they believe that. I think that's taking a big gamble. Is our lives worth that kind of gamble is my big question. Because it is asymmetric form of warfare that we've not prepared for. They will be hard to detect and extremely hard to take down if you're not being proactive and looking for it with early detection means. We got to be able to detect them early while they're being inflated. It's doable, but we're not doing that right now because it's not occurred to us. And that's the tension that I'm trying to bring up with this, that we got to pay attention to it and do something about it. And we absolutely can. But we got to get on top of it and do it now, because this could be any time. There's a lot of powers that could launch this stuff, including groups that just want to cause mayhem. So we've got to pay a lot of attention to this, Nate. So I'd like for people to go to my channel, and you can look at my videos and scroll over and find my EMP tac balloon video. I've posted a few videos since then, so you may have to scroll to find it. But watch that video. I'm sure Nate will post a link on here to it. If you would, subscribe to my channel. I also got a space channel called Galactic Griggs. So I've got several different channels out there. So please watch that, pay attention. And I'll be putting out announcements of things we can do to push to make the defense side of this work. Nate, I'll thank you for bringing me on here. You've got an awesome channel. I love your channel. I watch you daily. So and I like the stuff you put out and say you're a good analyst.
Well, that's high praise. That's high praise coming from you. And I'll also say you interview some really interesting guests as well. David Pine, I first seen him on your channel. I seen Dr. Peter Pry on your channel. So I would encourage people, go and check out Greg Allison's channel. Excellent. source of information, and you're trying to cram so much in here in an hour and a half. I can tell it's hard for you to kind of get it all out. So I'd encourage people, if you want him to expound on some of these topics that he talked about today, go and subscribe, check it out. I'll post a link in the description section below. And our redneck rocket scientist, our resident redneck rocket scientist, will answer all of your questions, guys. All right. So thanks a lot for coming on, Greg. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Nate. Appreciate you, man. Have a good one.
You take care.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.